No doubt. No doubt. Just as I start, someone else will appear, but we'll sort of do our normal muddle along. Before I start, I always like to check if there's any pressing questions from last week or any other week. If you've emailed me one and I haven't replied yet, then I will reply. Rochelle. It's only because you only emailed it an hour ago, so I think I'm quite good on the rest of them. I'm pretty good on the questions. Getting back. No, anything? Anyone questions about practice or anything? All sort of going along okay? Well, if we can do some practice, that's the best thing. That's all I'm saying. Even if it's just 5 minutes a day, it's invaluable. If you don't keep up some sort of practice, you're going to really struggle to sort of make any progress. I don't really like the word progress, but you sort of know what I mean. To feel like you're getting anywhere in particular. So do try and do some practice, even if it's a short time. That's better than nothing. And even if you think this is sort of comes into our topic acceptance, whether you think that when you sit down and do your practice, you might think, oh, that went well, or that went badly, and I couldn't stop thinking for a half hour or 5 minutes or whatever time you chose. That doesn't matter at all, because you don't really know what you're supposed to be achieving. When we do our meditation practice, just because our mind might think, oh, that went well or that didn't go well, that doesn't really mean anything at all. So I wouldn't really put any sort of credence on how well your mind thinks it went. The only important thing is just to do it, is to literally turn up and just do it every day or every other day or whatever you choose. So the acceptance bit is very useful. That accepting that I don't really know how my practice is supposed to go, because I'm working with something that's like outside of thinking mind. So logically, it's not really likely that my thinking mind will be able to be a good judge of whether that meditation was useful or not useful. So we get a chance, even when we sit down to practice, like just being still or being quiet, we get a great chance at that time to practice total acceptance. And acceptance is just allowing things to be as they were. We have no idea why some days we might sit down, close our eyes, and our mind is in total turmoil, and just like one thought after another appears, and we can't seem to let go of any of them. We're just sort of totally distracted. And then another day we sit down and things just seem to be really peaceful and quiet and still. We don't understand why that is. There's far too many things in our life going on to ever know exactly why that is. Might have been something you ate, something you watched, how you slept, somebody you spoke to. Anything can upset our internal state. But what we have to remember is that whenever we practice, it's not about having complete, still, quiet, silent mind. That's not the purpose of our practice. That can be a nice side effect of our practice, but that isn't any marker at all of it being successful or unsuccessful. Yeah, I'd say that it's always a success if we stop and take 5 minutes out, because we're always going to be learning something in that 5 minutes about ourselves. If we observe, we'll observe and we'll learn something from it. If we constantly judge it as being a good meditation or a bad meditation, then we will probably not learn very much at all, because we'll just fall straight back into judging again. So today I'm going to just chat over acceptance a little bit. It all ties into everything we've talked about before. All these things are so intrinsically bound up together, but we sort of take them as separate topics, because it would be impossible to talk about them all as one enormous topic. I don't think our brains could take it. So we talk about them as separate things, but acceptance is tied up with suffering, which we've talked about a lot, and suffering is tied up with what we believe ourselves to be, and all these different things. So they're all completely interconnected. So try to not see all of the topics that we might discuss as separate things, because they're not. They're very integral to each other. A bit like I was been teaching Jaya, like biology, our youngest biology. She wants to take her biology exam this year. And I noticed, like, after all the years of teaching biology as a biology teacher, as we were going through the book together, I noticed, and I think for the first time, I actually noticed, this book's been put together quite well. It's like chapter 3 is on like digestion and, how food gets broken down and turned into small molecules that the blood can then sort of absorb from the small intestine and stuff. That's the end of chapter 3. And then chapter 4 starts talking about blood cells and bloodstream and the heart and stuff, and then talking about how like all this, oxygen and carbon dioxide, but also the food and stuff that's been digested all gets then transported around the body. So especially when I can think back to like when you're a kid and you're learning biology or learning chemistry or whatever you're learning, they all seem to be like really separate topics that don't have much sense. But when you stand back and sort of see the greater picture, you see that everything is completely interconnected, especially like from a biology point of view. The body works as a whole organism, not as all these separate little bits doing the separate, independent jobs. So coming back to acceptance after my little sidetrack there, it's one of the things that people who are practicing meditation find hardest to understand, I think, hardest to get to grips with. And that's mainly because it's so like contrary to everything that we've been taught to believe. Like we've been taught to believe that we shouldn't accept things as they are necessarily. We should try and exert our control over everything and make things be exactly as we want them to be, and that if we don't do that, then we're a weak person, or we let people walk over us, and all this sort of gump. But in every single philosophy and religion, that idea of acceptance is really centrally important, whether it's like in the very religious traditions like Christianity and Islam, where there's this sort of submission to what they talk about as a god, or the much more hands-off approach of like Taoism, where we have this idea of like wu wei, or which is probably nicely translated as not forcing, like not trying to force life, just letting life unfold and trying to find your place in that jigsaw. But yeah, in almost every philosophy or religion, there are these ideas about acceptance, and that if we are able to just accept life a little bit more, then life will probably start just flowing. We'll stop getting in our own way so much. Also in Taoism, they talk about it as allowing the mystery to unfold, and I think that's a really nice thing, because I think in our lives we've forgotten how exciting and lovely the mysterious unfolding of everything actually is. It's like we're so obsessed with wanting to know how things are going to be and trying to fix things down in a certain way and being sure about the future, that actually that mysterious unfolding of life, not knowing what's going to happen next, is actually really quite beautiful and a really lovely thing just to let go into. But the reason we don't do it ultimately is because we're scared. Fear stops us doing that. Fear will stop us giving up a secure thing in exchange for something we're not so certain about. I think Thich Nhat Hanh said something like that. He said something like, we would much prefer to live with the suffering that we're familiar with rather than risking the unknown, or something like along those lines. It's like we'd rather be unhappy with the unhappiness that we're familiar with because we think we can deal with that, rather than just letting go of that and embarking on a sort of unknown adventure. So you might think like a job, so there's that fear of letting go of security, and I totally understand that, because I've done that many times. But that letting go into the unknown, I don't really know what's going to happen next. I haven't got a security of a regular income or regular this or that. There's sort of like this mystery unfolds. But actually, like, in some ways, that letting go is a really beautiful thing. It's like you're saying, I actually trust to this, and I just trust that everything will work out as it's meant to work out. Not even like I trust everything will work out just right, because that suggests that I think it should all work out just right for me, and that isn't really how it goes. You know, that's a very egocentric point of view, that everything should work out just right for me. That's bonkers. It's like the universe doesn't care about me. It's you know, I'm just another part of the jigsaw. So we come back to this idea, though, that this acceptance can be disempowering. We imagine that we have control. That's the first mistake. So we imagine that we can force our will over situations and circumstances, when in fact, if we examine that idea, we find it isn't true at all. And the root of that misunderstanding is that it probably all originates from the fact that we think we know what is the right thing to do or the right thing to happen. We honestly believe that we know what is best for us and for everybody else. You know, whether you voted Brexit or you didn't vote Brexit, or whether you voted Tories or Labour or whatever, we all do it for a reason, because we think that is the best thing to do. Yeah, and you know, we think other people are misguided or don't understand and should follow us. And I've got opinions just like everybody else. It's when we overly attach to them and try to impose them upon other people that it becomes a problem for ourselves. It causes us a lot of suffering. So what we fail to see when we think that we know best is that actually our little microscopic view of the world is nothing but a tiny little sliver of the whole. And that view is totally tainted and polluted, if you like, by our own perceptions and perspectives. So somebody with a totally different perspective will want the same event to turn out totally differently. And in that case, who's right? You know, if I want to do this because I see it this way, and someone else wants to do that because they see it that way, who's to say who's right? I mean, ultimately, we're both wrong. Relatively, we both have an opinion. There's nothing wrong with an opinion, but neither of them are ever ultimately right, because we can never know what will spill out from our actions. Like, none of us can see the future. So even though we think that that one choice might be right, we don't know the butterfly effect that any decision we make or any action we'll take will have in the future. So it's really sort of short-sighted to think that we should exert our control and will over everything because we think it's right. It's not to say that we just sit back and do nothing and just let life spill over us. If we think that something's the right thing to do, we do that from a good place that's not just driven by like emotion, but from a place of wisdom, then we should always act on that. But at the same time, there's a time when we let go of the fruit of our actions. So we don't cling to the result. It's like, I will do this because I believe it's the right thing to do. But almost every philosophy will say, do not cling to the fruit of your action, because that will cause you suffering. Because if it doesn't turn out as you imagine it should have done, you will suffer from that internally, for sure. So yeah, the refusal to accept what just is in our life is inextricably tied up with suffering, to be honest. And I often say to people, and they go, "Oh, why did this happen to me?" And I don't know why this happened to me. And I say, "Oh, when good stuff happened in life, did you stop and go, oh, why is this happening to me? Why is this good stuff happening to me?" We never do that. We just take it. We just take that as a given. So only when something that we perceive as bad or negative unfolds that we start to question, well, why did this negative thing happen to me? Why did this bad thing happen to me? But it's only good or bad from a perspective. It's not ultimately good or bad. And so when people say, oh, why did this happen to me? My general response sounds a little bit like slapdash, but it's totally true. I think I'd say stuff happens. That's that, like life happens. it doesn't happen to you. It just happens. It doesn't happen to me. Life just happens. Some of it I like, some of it I don't like, but it's not directed at me. All I have the choice to do is whether I accept it or whether I don't accept it. And generally, if I don't accept it and then I attach to the fruits of how I think it should be, I create suffering for myself. So it comes back to this idea of the poison arrows. You know, I've talked about this before. We say that like life just shoots the first arrow at you. That's just dumb bad luck. Like you get cancer, you get ill, die, you know, whatever. People you love die, you grieve, you get old. It's just life. It's like it could happen to me tomorrow. It could happen to any of us tomorrow. We have no idea. Someone said to me once, "We're all alive until 5 seconds before we're dead." We don't. There's never a point we go in 5 seconds. I'm going to be dead. But at some point, that is our last 5 seconds. So, but we inflict all of this secondary suffering on ourselves by trying to analyze why such and such has happened, and analyzing how we can make it better, how we, you know, how it could be different. That suffering, they're the arrows that we shoot at ourselves. Yeah. So the first arrow gets shot at us. That's just natural pains of life, getting ill, getting old, whatever. All the other subsequent arrows, we grab that arrow, we turn it around the bow, and we shoot those arrows at our own body. That's our self-created suffering and our inability to just accept that stuff happens. And again, that doesn't mean that like, oh, I'm ill, I won't, you know, I'll just sit here and accept it. I won't go and, you know, get the best medication or treatment I can. That would be totally ridiculous. Of course you should get whatever. But there is this line where we let go of the fruits of our choices still. It's like I go through it all. If it's, you know, if it's my destiny or if it's meant to work on me, it'll work on me. If it's not, it just isn't. And all I can do is really accept it or cause huge amounts of suffering for myself. It's this metaphor that Ramana Maharshi often uses about the carrying our baggage. And like he used to say, if, you know, imagine that putting your faith in your practice is like getting on board a train. Yeah. The train, once you get on the train, you can put your bags down. Like, let the train knows where it's going. You've trusted the train. So if you trust the train, take the bags off your shoulders and put them on the floor and let them take the weight. He said, but our problem is we embark on things like meditation and so on, and these sort of practices, but we don't actually trust them. So we get on the train, but we're still carrying the bags on our head. So we're like got 1 foot in and 1 foot out. But unless we put our bags down, we're never actually going to feel the benefit of letting go of that baggage, because we're still carrying it. You know, even though I'm on the train, even though I'm doing the practice, even though I'm reading about it and trying to trust to it, if I don't honestly put my bags down, I'm still carrying my bags at the end of the day. I can be on the train, I can be doing the practices, but without the faith to go with it, or the trust, if you like, faith's not a great word, then you're still going to be suffering or creating that suffering. So maybe acceptance is just to start to see things clearly and simply, without any additional narration or thinking around them that might arise from like fear or anger about the situation. That leaves us in a position not to react, but to, instead of reacting, to act from a place of wisdom. And we also see that, and I'm very clear about this in my life, and I try not to react. I'm not saying I always succeed at all, but, you know, I'm quite mindful of not reacting. That when we do take those emotional approaches to try and change things, often that leads to new problems. Could potentially we create more conflict, more anger, more fear, more negativity, more resentment, you know, from other parties, and this leads to huge, great stories unfolding that just make your life a total misery, where you think, if I could have just let that first thing go, it really wasn't that important. And what's happened is it's spiraled into an enormous, great big thing that now really is a pain in the neck. So I can think of something this week that happened, and I was just like, oh, it's just silly. Someone's acted out of fear and they've done this thing, and I could react to that really easily. And if I did, I know that they haven't got the awareness to not just compound that. And I know that I'm ultimately incorrect anyway. It's only ever from my perspective. So I just totally let the thing go. It wasn't really worth my energy or my time. And now I've totally forgotten it till just now. So, but I could have turned it into a huge thing that would have caused a lot of aggravation, but ultimately it was totally pointless. It was just two different conflicting points of view. So practice in acceptance is slightly different to this sort of stillness practice or meditation practice, because practice in acceptance is what I think of like as an active meditation or an in the moment practice that takes place through our daily life, like through our day. We don't necessarily sit down with our legs crossed and our eyes closed to practice acceptance. It might be a useful place to just churn over the ideas, but practicing acceptance is stuff that happens like in the moment all day long. When something happens and you've got to that moment to either react or take a step back, take a breath, and then hopefully act with some sort of clarity or wisdom that isn't driven by your emotions, and that won't then cause more suffering for yourself and probably for others. So yeah, so I think that was sort of my little discussion on acceptance. Sod's Law, the emails I'll get, because these often come up and they're very valid. And there's someone who did a lot of sitting up trees when they were younger and trying to stop roads being built and studying environmental science at uni. It's like the environment is something that I feel passionately about. But I often get people emailing and saying, like, I can't let go of the worry about climate change and the environment and everything else, and so on and so on. And I understand that completely. But do I worry about that? No, not at all. I don't lose a second of sleep about climate change and everything else. Because from a much broader perspective, I think I still act in the best way I possibly can, like within the bounds of how I live. Yes, we've got 2 cars because we live in the absolute middle of nowhere. The nearest bus is 40-minute walk away. Just sold our really sort of gas guzzling 4x4 to get something that guzzles less gas, but I still live up a dirt track, so I still have to have a 4x4. But there are things I can do in my life that I still think are the right things to do, for example. But do I sit in bed at night and worry about climate change? No, because I don't know. It's like that on a global scale, I can act locally and do what I think is best, but then let go of the fruits of that. It's like I'm still going to live the best, most wholesome life I think I should do, but then I can't expect that is going to change the whole of the planet. And I'm talking from a scientific based sort of perspective as someone who studied this. It's like ultimately the whole worrying about climate change thing, from how I see it from a broader perspective, is very egocentrically driven, and that will rub up quite hard with a lot of people, because by that I mean we see things like climate change, and from a point of view of the world being the way we want it to be, in other words, green and full of lovely animals and sort of a nice place for us to live. But actually, for 99.9% of the time the Earth's been here, there have been no humans on it. There were no animals on it. There were no trees on it. That's a very recent little blip in Earth's history. And if we all got wiped out by climate change, everything else would recover and probably be 100 times better off without us. So the way I see it is like, I certainly am not going to make it worse, and I'll do everything I can to live a decent life, growing my own vegetables. I don't really drive unless we have to drive anywhere. I don't just poodle about. I haven't been on a plane for 4 or 5 years now. Even learnt to sail, so I didn't have to go on a plane again. But at the same time, I totally let go of the fruits of all that and just think I do what I do because I think it's best. But at the same time, I can't expect that the whole world's going to fall in with that. And if it's our destiny to get baked at 55 degrees, then every other animal on the planet will probably think, thank God they're gone. Now we can like breathe a fresh air. So my perspective is that we only see everything from a very egocentric point of view. In other words, how do I want it to be? Even if that is, I don't want animals to suffer, that's because it would make us unhappy. And we only ever want to be happy, which is what we talked about last week. So nothing is ultimately altruistic. However pure and beautiful we think our thoughts are, they're only because ultimately we believe they make us happy. Now that might churn up a lot of resistance, and I'm fully open to that because I'm ultimately wrong. It's just a relative point of view, and I'm not clinging to it. But yeah, any questions? I'm going to leave that there before we do our little quiet stillness practice. Everyone's chewing it over again. He's a climate. I'm not a climate denier, by the way. Climate change denier.
Dan, it's Helen.
Helen.
Yeah, just on the climate change front then. So, because I get quite annoyed and frustrated with people who are climate deniers. So, you know, the ones that, well, not even deniers, the ones that choose to ignore it and say it's not my problem, I'm not going to be here. That sort of attitude I find quite frustrating, and I do like to express my views. So when you like to, you know, express your views with other people, I'd suggest from what you just said, then that's using your own ego again, is it? Or
ultimately, of course, it is, yeah. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't express them. It just means that you should try to express them without any like either, you know, emotion attached, because then we become very, like, do you know what I mean? We become quite blinded about our own view. As soon as emotion starts to get involved, it's just like all about us. So I mean, yes, ultimately you're totally right. Every single opinion comes from ego, the belief that we are limited to the body and mind, if you like, and everything therefore is in relation to that body and mind. So I want everything to be in alignment with what I think's best for this body and mind, you know, and for the happiness of it. So yes, you're totally right there. But at the same time, you know, we still believe ourselves to be the body and mind. I do, you know, I haven't got over that one yet. So I still got opinions, and I still have, you know, perspectives and so on. So all we can do at this point then is to express those opinions in the most compassionate way possible, and see that everyone else has got an opinion as well. And also always remember that actually I might be wrong. Do you know what I mean? Even as someone who's studied all of this, it's like, I might be wrong. Science might be wrong. Science is often wrong, you know, and often like 100 years down the line, they go, oh, actually, it was something totally different. I'm not suggesting it is, because that's not what science points at. But, you know, everyone thought the earth was flat for a very long time, and so, you know, most scientists did, and everyone who didn't think the earth was flat was called a kook and a freak and a heretic. But at some point the flat earthers were, you know, won over by the round earthers. So yeah, it comes back to that thing that we always think we're right, and we sort of need to try and just change that perspective and think, this is just my opinion, you know, and it's coming from a good place. But at the same time, I know that ultimately every opinion is gonna be somewhat incorrect, because it's just an opinion. It's like it's just based on circumstantial knowledge, isn't it? It's not like we've actually ever researched any of that stuff. All of our knowledge and understanding of the world is just based on what we're told. So yeah, you know,
true, yeah. What you see on the news, etc.
Yeah, exactly. Even scientists who write papers, you know, they can't possibly do the previous research, so they'll base their papers, you know, in research on stuff that's gone before. They can't possibly keep going back. So we take a lot of stuff as given in trust, almost everything basically about our world we just take in trust. So yeah, this is I mean, I love this topic because it is a really good one to chew over.
Thank you. More to chew over.
yeah. It just throws up so many questions about, you know, how we interact with people. And
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Sorry, because my dad, I don't want to take up all the time, but my late dad was a scientist as well. He would have argued that there was another reason for what was going on with the planet, you know, that it was actually natural evolution. And he actually gave me a book to read on it, and I haven't read it yet. And now you're making me think I should read it. Yeah. I
mean, ultimately, we will never know, you know, probably not for another 1,000 years. It's one of those things, isn't it? It's like, I suppose, you know, the evidence points in a certain way, but like I said, even from studying it, it's very difficult to say, you know, 100. No one can say 100% anything, because as long as there's a 1% doubt over anything, then it's not ultimately true. So yeah, no, it's fascinating. But I think what we're more concerned is about how we create suffering for ourselves. You know, like you said, it's quite easy to get agitated by people who deny it, and I totally understand what you say. But I think that agitation, we have to be careful, because what we're doing is we're very subtly pinning that agitation on them, and we're believing that they are the source of, you know, our discomfort or annoyance, when actually the agitation is being created by us, because we can't accept that other people have a differing point of view. So ironically, we are the source of our suffering there, but we believe it's somebody else causing us that suffering, and that's logically, that's complete nonsense. But that's how we live our whole lives, you know, most of the time. It's only when we take a step back with some clarity that we see all of that suffering is derived from ourselves. No one can ever impose suffering upon us, even if they're torturing us. Still a choice whether you're going to feel pain and whatever. But you know, the suffering of hatred, anger, resentment, that's still ultimately self-chosen, self-inflicted. Because you hear these stories about amazing people who've gone through horrific things, and they have nothing but compassion for their, you know, captors or whatever, and they seem to come out of it glowing rather than broken, carrying all this PTSD for the rest of their life, you know, because they've taken a conscious choice not to create more suffering for themselves. That was a long-winded answer, but I hope that was useful. It's all choice. In other words, it's our choice how we act and react. We sort of forget that, and we just assume that we don't have a choice. We just react impulsively. Any other questions before we move on to a bit of stillness? Okay, well, you can chew over that. You can always ping me an email or ask at the end. The thing with this, I think, is, like I said, it's a real-time practice. So just put it to the test. Like, notice when you're agitated by other people's opinions. It's like, opinions aren't real. It's just an opinion. It's not even like they're hitting you with a piece of wood. It's just an opinion. It's like, how can that possibly cause us suffering unless we decide it's going to cause us suffering? It's bonkers. So yeah, when we start to observe ourselves, the more we do that, the more we see how everything that we sort of create for ourselves is based just around assumption. I'm just assuming that I should be angry because someone's opinion is different to mine, or I think what they're saying is ridiculous. I assume that should make me angry. So, and without checking it, I just go with the flow and I become angry. And it's our automatic thing. And we all do it all the time. I've been doing it today with various little things, not huge, great big blow ups or anything, but just like, oh, that's so irritating. Oh, God, why has Jaya left her bloody dirty socks on the floor again? It's like, we just do it all day. It's like silly little things. It's like, she just left her socks there. Okay, it's my choice to find it irritating. I really wish she would put them in the washing basket. The irritation arises from within me, not from the socks, not from Jaya, because she's just completely ditzy and forgetful. The irritation arises from no one else but me. And it's only us observing that where we actually ever really start to take that lesson on board and believe in it. Up to then, it's just an idea, another idea. Okay, cool. Right, well, relax back, and yeah, you can turn your camera off if you want to. I'm going to just lead like a little 20-minute session, and maybe a little bit shorter, so we've got time for questions. You can have your camera on or off, have your eyes open or closed. You can lie down or sit up. If you lie down, you might fall asleep, so just be warned. And as ever, if you don't feel comfortable with the practice in any way, you can stop at any time. Just open your eyes, have a stretch, whatever. Don't have to stick with it if you're not enjoying it. If you want to turn your camera off, just click the little camera thing at the bottom there. If not, just leave it on. Cool. So first thing we'll do is just come to an awareness of breathing. I always say that. Doesn't have to be breathing. Breathing's just useful because it's always there. So we just notice that we're breathing. That's all. So hopefully we've been breathing all day. But chances are we probably haven't even noticed we've been breathing all day. So just notice that the breath is there. Like, oh, hello. Oh, suddenly the breath just comes to life. It's like it didn't exist until just a second ago. And all of a sudden, there it is, just waiting for you. Where's it been hiding? So we just notice the breath. We don't need to label the breath or add any stories about the breath. Just notice it's there is enough. You might notice that it's fast or slow, rough or smooth, deep or shallow. You might notice that it's moving through the nose or the mouth. You don't have to put any words to that. Enough just to be openly aware. And of course, very quickly our awareness stretches out as attention towards other things. Remember the other week we spoke about our awareness. We could imagine it's like a black dot at the center of a circle, if it helps you to visualize things. And naturally it just rests in that little black hole at the center. That's where our awareness just rests in itself. But everything, all things, we could say, are circulating around that awareness. There are sounds, thoughts, feelings, sensations, and so on. And our awareness then stretches out towards those things. It stretches out as attention, our attention goes out towards a sound or a thought or a feeling. And it often gets to a point where it feels as if that black spot or black hole of awareness is being stretched in 100 directions at once to 100 different thoughts, worries, anxieties, plans. We feel completely overwhelmed at those times because it feels as if we're being stretched really thinly. And that's because this awareness is being pulled out of itself in all directions towards these objects, towards these things. And all it really wants to do is just rest back in itself. Rest back in that dark, still center. Or however you want to visualize it. Might be a bright spot on a black page, whatever. But for now, we're just going to let it stretch out towards the breath. Just to stretch out towards one thing. And if it starts stretching out towards thoughts, worries, plans, that's fine, but just allow it to untangle from those and retreat or fall back into itself. You've just got this one strand going out towards the breath. You can do whatever you want with the breath if it helps. You can count the breath or follow the breath around a shape, triangle or an egg, or whatever works for you. But just keep that one strand of attention out towards the breath. And we notice as soon as the awareness stretches out towards something else, we can feel it as a gentle irritation or a feeling of agitation, however subtle that might be. That sense of irritation or agitation is telling us that we're stretching out again. The awareness is being stretched out. So just keep untangling it from anything else and let it rest back in itself with one strand of attention resting on the breath. And we're going to gently move that attention from the active breath into the stillness between the breaths. So at the end of your inhale and your exhale, there's a brief moment of silence or space or emptiness, stillness, where there's no breath. Keep taking the attention only to that still space, where the breath just stops moving for a moment. Slightly paradoxical practice because there's no breath to focus on. There's no thing at that point. The awareness or the attention is searching for a thing that isn't there. There's just a stillness or an emptiness, which is framed either side by a moving breath in and out. But we're not concerned with the moving breath, we're concerned with the moment, however tiny that is, where there's no breath, no thing. And it's that still space, or that empty space, apparently empty, that the thing that is the breath appears from. The emptiness or the stillness is the underlying reality of the breath. It's always there. The breath just appears within it. Emerges from the stillness. We're going to gently untangle our attention from anything to do with the breath. And we're just going to move it over towards thoughts, feelings, or emotions that appear. Always useful because in so many practices we are concerned with moving away from the thoughts. But in this practice now, we're going to look directly at them. And ironically, when we try to look directly at the thoughts, they tend to slow down or vanish. But there may be thoughts, maybe very subtle thoughts that you're not even aware of. They may just be expressed as feelings, sensations in the body, maybe. And when we try to take our attention to thoughts, it's actually very difficult to know what a thought is. If I challenged you to explain to me in words what a thought was, you'd find it very difficult. We talk about them as my thoughts. But if we try to look at where they come from, They don't appear to arise from what we think of as us or me. They just seem to appear from a great stillness or emptiness. So notice any thoughts or feelings that do appear. Don't add to them, don't chase them, don't label them, just be aware of them. And then just like with the breath, we gently move the attention into the spaces between the thoughts, into the emptiness or silence behind the thoughts. So we're taking our awareness from things, current things, into a space of no thing. Thoughts are always appearing from this silence, from this place of no thought. Rather than focusing on the thoughts, take your attention to that space behind them or in between them. That space is always there. The thoughts just intrude now and again. But the stillness, the space is always there. Like a screen that the thoughts are projected on. I've heard it said that this practice is a bit like a cat looking at a mouse hole, waiting for the mouse to pop its head out. The mouse being the thoughts. But the mouse appears from this darkness or emptiness of the mouse hole. And the cat is so completely focused on that mouse hole that it entirely forgets about its own body, its own breath, or any sounds or other distractions. All that exists for the cat is the mouse hole. Just as in this practice, all that exists is the awareness, the space that underlies the thoughts. So even if we're being distracted by what seems like a barrage of thoughts and ideas and worries or whatever, mind activity, that's great because they're all coming from somewhere. They're all emerging. You need to follow them back. Don't be concerned about the thoughts. Let them come as often as they want. You don't need to stop them in any way. We're just concerned about that quiet, still space that they're appearing from. And that is always there, even if the thoughts are non-stop. Thoughts are still emerging from an emptiness, from a still silence, however you want to define it. You just resting the attention on that silence behind the thoughts. And again, there's some agitation. Agitation, we feel like we're being stretched out in the wrong direction or pulled in several directions at once. And that's all part of our practice. Nobody said meditation should be peaceful and beautiful. Just a practice of learning and a great chance to just accept whatever we're experiencing. Good. And just become aware of your body again now. You may have forgotten all about the body. All of a sudden, there it is, reappeared. Notice the breath. All of a sudden, the breath has appeared, apparently from nowhere. Where'd it go? Just let the breath move a tiny bit deeper, a little bit more energy. Just let it fill your arms and your legs, hands, fingers, your head. Gently bringing your body back to life. You might feel some gentle movement coming back. Just taking any sort of stretch you need, or rubbing your face or your hands, or whatever you feel inclined to do. Remember, it can take us a little while to reconnect with our body and our breath and the space around us again, a bit like waking up from a dream. Cool. Well, I did go on for 20 minutes in the end. These things can't be rushed. I don't know what these things are. I'm getting a cold. Sniffles. Okay, right. So that was just a practice of, like we have been doing, really. Probably there's no need to keep reinventing the wheel. We've sort of touched on this practice before, and practices like it, but we're really like locating things, and then we're just gradually untangling from the things, and we're just sort of retreating back to the space behind the things where there appears to be no things. Just like a stillness or a space or an emptiness. I don't know, I use lots of different words. Hopefully one makes sense for you. And then we're just trying to rest there, and then gradually, almost like we're retreating eventually back into that center point that all of that awareness or attention is emerging out of. That's the slow process of not doing, of just letting go and sort of resting back or relaxing back. Any questions before we wrap up? Okay. Well, you can always ping them over if you have them. I love a good email. I hope it was useful. Remember, I just always reinforce this. It doesn't have to feel good. It doesn't have to be beautiful or peaceful even. I have a lot of really, I have a lot of very useful, frustrating meditations. Most of them, in fact. I'd say peacefulness can just be a side effect. You can be enjoyable. Enjoy it, but don't attach to it. It's not the point of the practice. The point of the practice is to understand what's going on, what we really are, what this is all about. Yeah, well, thanks everybody. I hope that was enjoyable. I'm just going to see if I can start recording. Probably can't. I'll leave it running. We'll be on next week, I think, unless England somehow make it through to the semi-finals, and then we might have to adjourn. But I'll see how it feels today. Oh yeah, and if anybody wants to, I'm doing this thing in January. You're more than welcome to join. It's early start, 6:30, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So if you want a regular sort of practice, yeah, they do. As soon as you think about thoughts, they vanish. It's very bizarre. Or you focus on them. Yeah, you're more than welcome to join. It's sort of it's time. I'm always up meditating anyway, so you're basically welcome to hang out with me. I'll just verbalize what I'm doing. And yeah, if anyone needs a sponsored place, some people have very kindly paid for anyone that can't afford a place to join up as well. So just ping me a message if you can't afford it. And she's very lovely of everybody in a nice community. Yeah, sweet. All right, well, that was great. Hopefully useful. Do some practice, and inshallah, I'll see you next week. Or inshallah, maybe not. Take it easy. Have a lovely week. Thank you for hanging out.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you, Dad.
Gute
Thanks,
Nacht.
Dan.
Dankeschön.
No worries. Dankeschön. That's all good. Now. Can I? No. There we go. Perfect.